You may have won the battle, but not the war. Attached was a blurry photo of me on the porch, drinking coffee. Taken that morning. Someone else was watching. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. I wasn't done here. Not yet. The deeper I dug into Karen's time in office, the more I realized this wasn't just about Pine Ridge. There were ties to other communities, favor trading, selective approvals. And if my instincts were right, Karen had allies. Or worse, successors. The air had a new edge to it that morning, sharper than mountain chill and heavier than anything a simple resignation could explain. Karen was gone, at least officially, but her presence lingered like the aftertaste of burnt coffee. The kind you can't rinse out no matter how much water you drink. I walked to the mailbox and found 3 envelopes. One was a flyer for pest control, another a reminder from the local co-op about a volunteer meeting. But the third was different. It was unmarked. No stamp. Just a single piece of paper inside with a typed message that read, "You were warned." No signature. No return address. The font was courier, old-fashioned and dramatic, like someone trying too hard to sound ominous. I stared at it for a long second before folding it and slipping it into the same file folder I kept Karen's fake citations in. If she thought she could still rattle me from the shadows, she didn't understand who she was dealing with. Later that day, I drove into town to grab a few supplies. While loading lumber into the back of the truck, I spotted a familiar face at the feed store, Walt Dempsey, former HOA president over in Pine Hollow. He had once been forced out over corruption charges, but last I heard, he'd taken up residence nearby, quietly collecting favors. He wore mirrored sunglasses and pretended not to see me, but I walked over anyway. "Didn't think you were the kind to shop local," I said. He chuckled without humor. "Didn't think you were the kind to burn down your own system, just to spite one woman." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't burn anything down. I enforced the rules. Isn't that what HOAs are all about?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask. To some people, it's a game. A power game. Karen lost. Others are still playing." I leaned in slightly. "That a warning?" He smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes, but not in a good way. "Just a reminder. When you knock down the queen, the pawns start looking for new orders." Back at the cabin, I reviewed the files Margot had sent. It wasn't just Pine Ridge anymore. Since the audit started, I'd received 6 complaints from nearby HOA communities claiming similar patterns: selective enforcement, absurd fines, intimidation tactics. In one case, a man had been told to repaint his barn every 6 months or face foreclosure. In another, a widow was cited for leaving her porch light on past 10 p.m. The rules weren't just strict, they were weaponized. And guess what? In 3 of those cases, Karen's name appeared in board meeting minutes as a consultant. She hadn't been working alone. She'd been part of a network, a tangled mess of former presidents, retired board members, and so-called neighborhood advocates, all of whom still had their claws in various corners of the county. And they didn't like losing control. By nightfall, I was making calls. Margot patched me through to the director of regional compliance for the state. We spoke for over an hour, comparing notes, reviewing timelines, and drafting a wider investigation. If I was going to take down the whole structure Karen had helped build, I needed more than just witness statements. I needed audit records, budget trails, and correspondence logs. Paper trails were the death of tyrants. The next morning, I woke to the sound of metal clanking. I walked outside barefoot, coffee still in hand, and found a tow truck hooked to my truck's rear axle. The driver didn't look up. He was focused, quick, already securing the front end. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Order from the HOA enforcement," he said without pause. Said this vehicle was parked in an unauthorized zone. I looked around. My driveway hadn't changed since the day my father graded it himself. "Who signed the order?" I asked. He finally looked at me, uncertain now. "Lady named Regina Marks. Temporary president." "Of course. The board had already elected a replacement, and they'd picked Karen's best friend. I called the sheriff's office while the tow truck idled awkwardly, still hooked to my truck. Within 15 minutes, Deputy Reeves pulled up. He was one of the good ones, someone who remembered me from years back. I explained the situation. He nodded, checked the paperwork, and frowned. This is invalid. No license number. No official letterhead. Just a name and some vague complaint. I'll handle this. He ordered the tow truck to unhook, and the driver, clearly irritated, did as told. I watched from the porch, arms crossed, as my truck returned to the earth. Reeves turned to me. You planning on sticking around long? Long enough to finish what I started, I replied. After he left, I walked down to the HOA office, which was basically a glorified storage shed repurposed with a printer and a mini-fridge. Regina was already inside, standing behind the counter like she was waiting for me. Her expression was blank, unreadable. Mr. Fowler, she said calmly. Can I help you? I'm not sure yet. Why was my truck nearly towed? She gestured toward a clipboard on the desk. New parking regulations. You haven't submitted a vehicle registration to the board. The board I'm actively auditing? The board that still functions until a formal ruling says otherwise, she snapped. There it was, her real tone. I stepped closer. I know Karen didn't act alone. I know you signed off on more than half her citations. I have proof. You can step down now, or you can wait until your name's on the next headline. She leaned in too. This isn't a dictatorship, Alan. People elected me. They trust me. That's about to change, I said. Because I'm going public. That evening, I drafted the report and sent it to every media outlet within 2 counties. It wasn't just dry legal jargon, it was stories, photos, testimonies, elderly residents crying on porches, families fined into silence. One man showed me how Karen had banned his wife's wheelchair ramp for aesthetic reasons. The report hit like wildfire. By the next morning, I had 20 emails and 15 missed calls. Channel 4 News wanted an interview. The Tribune wanted photos. A local podcast invited me to talk about HOA tyranny. Suddenly, I wasn't just enforcing rules. I was the face of resistance. But that came with risk. On Wednesday night, someone threw a rock through my cabin window. A note was rubber-banded to it. Stop digging or we'll bury you in paperwork. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been aimed at my head. I replaced the window myself and reported it, but I didn't back down. Instead, I took it as proof. They were scared. And when people like Karen and Regina get scared, they get sloppy. That sloppiness paid off. Margot found a series of financial transfers linking the Pine Ridge HOA account to a personal savings account in Regina's name. Thousands of dollars. Unexplained. Buried under labels like community events and infrastructure reviews. When I confronted her the next day, she went pale. You don't understand, she whispered. It was Karen's idea. She said everyone was doing it. I recorded the confession and sent it straight to the legal board. Now it wasn't just a suspension. It was criminal. Fraud. Embezzlement. Abuse of authority. And as the house of cards collapsed, other HOAs began to panic. Presidents stepped down. Secretaries resigned. Entire boards were replaced overnight. The county, once a hotbed of petty dictatorship, started to feel like a community again. Residents planted gardens. Kids rode bikes. Dogs barked without fear of citation. The wind was restless that night, scraping pine needles across the metal roof like fingernails against a chalkboard. I hadn't meant to stay up, but something kept me awake. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the cabin felt too quiet, too still, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. I sat in the dark by the living room window, sipping black coffee and watching shadows sway across the gravel road. When the motion sensor light flicked on at exactly 3:07 a.m., I didn't flinch. I just reached over, opened the drawer, and grabbed the flashlight and my phone. The figure that triggered the light didn't linger long. just long enough to walk to my front gate, bend down, and slide something under it before vanishing into the trees. I waited 5 minutes before stepping outside. The cold slapped me fully awake. At the gate sat a yellow manila envelope sealed tight with duct tape. I picked it up, brought it inside, and opened it carefully. Inside were 30 printed pages, mostly emails, board memos, and scanned signatures. One phrase kept jumping off the page: unauthorized vote. And the name at the top of every sheet? Karen Thomas. Whoever delivered it didn't leave a note. No message, no explanation. But the contents were clear. These were records of secret votes conducted under the table, unsigned agreements passed without board review, and manipulated proxies submitted by members who were either out of state or deceased. Karen had rigged her own elections for years, installing people she controlled, keeping herself in power even when official rules should have forced her out. She wasn't just the problem, she was the architect of the whole corrupt system. The packet included the names of 6 individuals, some still active, some long gone, but every one of them linked to budget discrepancies or complaints that mysteriously disappeared. And at the center of it all was a digital trail leading to a private email account hosted offshore. At sunrise, I forwarded everything to the Legal Oversight Committee and made 2 phone calls. One to Margot, who barely let me finish before saying, "I'll draft the emergency hearing notice within the hour." The second was to Channel 4, who I'd promised an exclusive if something big came up. I didn't give them the entire packet, but I gave them enough to start digging. If Karen wanted to play underground politics, I'd bury her strategy above ground where everyone could see it. By midday, the media storm had returned, bigger than before. Karen's photo hit the evening news alongside words like fraud, manipulation, and expulsion. Residents of Pine Ridge and beyond began demanding full board reconstructions. Protest signs appeared near HOA offices. One handmade banner read, "This ain't North Korea, Karen." Someone else spray-painted, "I own my grass," on the sidewalk outside the Briar Hollow HOA building. It was messy, loud, and long overdue. What surprised me, though, was how many people showed up at my cabin the next day. Not to complain, not to protest, but to thank me. They brought pies, homemade bread, and awkward but sincere handshakes. Mr. Singh brought his grandson, who ran laps around my truck while I shared tea with the man who, only weeks earlier, was too afraid to report a fake fine. An older woman named Linda cried on my deck, as she explained how Karen once fined her for placing a statue of St. Francis in her flower bed, calling it an unauthorized religious display. She'd removed it and kept it in a closet for 2 years. That afternoon, I helped her reinstall it with a spotlight. By week's end, the state board called a formal hearing to strip Karen of all eligibility to serve in any HOA capacity again. Her name would be added to a list of banned officials. Her allies were being investigated, and Regina, the short-lived successor, had already agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. The hammer was falling, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter, something heavier. The kind of weight you carry when you realize you weren't just fixing a system. You were exposing a wound the community had been pretending not to see. Still, Karen hadn't surfaced. No press statement, no apology, no denial. Just silence. Until the night before the hearing. I stepped out to grab firewood and found a Jeep idling at the end of my driveway. As I approached, the window rolled down. Karen sat behind the wheel, dressed in black, eyes hidden behind those same obnoxious sunglasses. She didn't look defeated. She looked furious. "You win," she said. "But you don't understand what you've started." I didn't say anything. She continued. "People like order. They need it. You think you helped them, but all you did was tear down the only structure that kept things from falling apart." I stepped closer. "You didn't build order, Karen. You built fear. And the only thing falling apart now is your little empire." Her lip curled. "You think you're a hero, but all you did was give lazy people permission to be messy." "No," I said calmly, I gave good people permission to breathe. She didn't respond.